The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the narrow walls of the servants' quarters as Eleanor Russell knelt on the cold stone floor, her reddened hands polishing silver that would grace tables she'd never be invited to sit at. At 26 years old, her pale face bore the hollowness of someone who had learned to make herself invisible, and her perpetually hunched shoulders told the story of a woman who'd spent years trying to take up less space in a world that constantly reminded her she was unwanted. The worn fabric of her gray servant's dress provided little warmth against the December chill that seeped through the basement walls, and the acrid smell of polish burned her nostrils as she worked in silence, accompanied only by the distant sounds of laughter from the grand ballroom 3 floors above. Eleanor was known throughout London society as the peculiar Russell girl, that unfortunate eldest daughter who had long passed marriageable age and, according to the cutting whispers of her mother's social circle, possessed such strange inclinations and unsettling behaviors that no respectable gentleman would ever consider her. Her own family treated her as little more than unpaid help, a shameful secret to be kept below stairs during important gatherings, constantly reminding her that she was a burden, a stain on the family reputation, who brought nothing but embarrassment to their distinguished name. Hello, dear reader. Before we begin Eleanor's extraordinary journey, I invite you to immerse yourself in this tale of darkness and light, of ancient evil and unexpected love. Settle in, for this is a story that will transform everything you thought you knew about monsters. That particularly cold evening, Eleanor felt the weight of her isolation pressing even heavier upon her chest. Through the narrow basement window, she could see the hem of elegant gowns sweeping past as guests arrived for her sister Vivian's pre-engagement celebration. She paused in her polishing to press her aching fingers against her temples, trying to quiet the strange whispers that had plagued her since childhood. Sounds no one else seemed to hear. Shadows that moved with unnatural purpose when candlelight flickered. It was then she noticed something peculiar in the corner of the dim room. The shadows there seemed darker than they should be, almost solid, and as she stared, they appeared to shift and writhe as though alive. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd seen these impossible things her entire life, visions that had earned her the labels of strange, disturbed, and touched in the head from her own mother. "You needn't hide from what you see, Miss Russell," came a voice, deep, cultured, and impossibly compelling, from directly behind her. Eleanor spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs, to find a man standing in the doorway she could have sworn was empty just moments before. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with aristocratically sharp features and unusually pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight. His clothing was impeccable, a perfectly tailored black coat, silk waistcoat, and cravat that spoke of enormous wealth. Yet there was something ancient in his bearing, as though he carried centuries of knowledge behind his intense, oddly crimson-rimmed eyes. "Forgive my intrusion," he said, stepping into the room with movements that were unnaturally fluid, almost predatory in their grace. "I seem to have lost my way to the ballroom." His gaze never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made Eleanor feel simultaneously exposed and, strangely, seen for the first time in her life. Though perhaps I found exactly what I was searching for instead. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, painfully aware of her disheveled appearance and servant's attire. "The ballroom is 3 floors above, sir. The main staircase—" "I know where the ballroom is," he interrupted gently, moving closer. As he did, Eleanor noticed the shadows in the corner retreating, shrinking back as though afraid of his presence. "I am Lord Lucian Ravencroft, and you are Eleanor Russell, Are you not? The eldest daughter?" She was stunned. How did this nobleman know her name? Her family never spoke of her in polite company, certainly never to someone of his obvious rank and wealth. Yes, my lord. But how did you—" "Those shadows you see," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, his eyes flicking meaningfully to the corner where the darkness still writhed. "They're real, and they're watching you. They've been watching you for quite some time." Eleanor's mouth went dry. No one had ever acknowledged the things she saw. Everyone dismissed them as delusions, symptoms of a disordered mind. You can see them too?" Lord Ravencroft stepped even closer, and Eleanor felt an unnatural chill emanating from him. Yet paradoxically, she felt safer than she had in years. "I can see them because I know what they are. And more importantly, I know what you are, Miss Russell. That light I see flickering beneath your skin, that gift your family has spent your entire life trying to suppress. It's the very thing that makes you precious, irreplaceable." His gaze intensified, and for just a moment, his eyes flashed a deeper crimson. "And it's also what makes you their target." "Target?" Eleanor whispered, her mind reeling. "Whose target?" Before Lord Ravencroft could answer, a scream echoed from somewhere above, sharp, terrified, and abruptly cut short. The shadows in the corner suddenly surged forward, no longer merely writhing, but taking shape. Twisted, grotesque forms with gleaming red eyes that locked onto Eleanor with predatory hunger. In one fluid motion, Lord Ravencroft stepped between her and the shadow creatures. He raised one pale hand, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with power. The creatures recoiled, hissing in voices that sounded like wind through a graveyard, before dissipating like smoke. "We don't have much time," he said, turning back to Eleanor, with an expression of grim determination. "Something ancient and malevolent has finally found you, Miss Russell. Something that has hunted your bloodline for centuries. And he hesitated, as though the next words cost him dearly. "I made an oath long ago to protect you. To protect your line at any cost." "I don't understand," Eleanor began, but another scream cut through the air, followed by the sound of shattering glass and panicked voices flooding the halls above. Lord Ravencroft's jaw tightened. "Your family is in danger. Everyone in this house is in danger. Because of you. Because of what you carry inside you." He extended his hand to her, his unnaturally cold fingers steady and sure. "I can protect you, Eleanor. I can teach you to master the gift that terrifies your family. But first, you must trust me. You must come with me now, before it's too late." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, her mind spinning with questions, fears, and the impossible reality unfolding around her. This stranger, this lord who appeared from nowhere, who saw the shadows she'd spent her life doubting, who spoke of ancient oaths and hidden gifts, was offering her something her family never had: protection, purpose, and the validation that she wasn't mad. After all, from above came more screams, the sound of furniture crashing, and her mother's voice shrieking orders to bar the doors. Eleanor looked into Lord Ravencroft's strange, crimson-rimmed eyes and saw something she'd never expected to find in the gaze of any man, let alone a mysterious nobleman: genuine concern for her welfare. And beneath that concern, she sensed something older, darker, and infinitely more complex than anything she'd encountered in her sheltered, suppressed life. "Who are you, really?" she asked, even as she felt herself reaching for his hand. A sad smile crossed his perfect features. Someone who has been searching for you for longer than you can possibly imagine. Someone who will stand between you and the darkness that hunts you. His smile faded. And someone who will ask you to make impossible choices before this night is through. Eleanor placed her trembling hand in his cold, steady grasp. The moment their skin touched, she felt something surge through her, a warmth, a light, a power that had been sleeping inside her suddenly stirring to wakefulness. The silver candlestick beside her flared with golden light for just an instant before returning to normal. Lord Ravencroft's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his composed exterior. "Extraordinary," he breathed. "You're already awakening. We may have more time than I thought. Or far less." He pulled her toward the servants' door leading to the garden, moving with that same unnatural grace. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding, her mind flooded with questions. But one certainty rising above all the confusion. Her life, the small, suppressed, invisible life she'd been forced to live, was over. Whatever came next, whether salvation or damnation, it would be something entirely new. Behind them, the shadow creatures began to reform, their red eyes multiplying in the darkness, their hissing voices rising to a chorus. "The last Lumina, the last light. She cannot escape. She is ours." Lord Ravencroft paused at the threshold, looking back at the encroaching darkness, with something like ancient resignation in his eyes. "They've been waiting so long for this moment," he said quietly. "And so have I. The difference, Miss Russell, is that I intend to ensure you survive it." As they stepped out into the freezing December night, Eleanor cast one last glance back at the house where she'd spent 26 years, being told she was worthless, mad, and shameful. Screams still echoed from within. Shadows moved unnaturally behind every window. And somewhere in that chaos were the people who'd called themselves her family but had never shown her love. "Can you save them?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Lord Ravencroft studied her face in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "I can try. But Eleanor, I may ask you to choose, before this is over, between saving them and saving yourself. Between the family that rejected you and the destiny that has been calling you since birth." He squeezed her hand gently. "And I need you to know. Whatever you choose, I will stand with you, even if it costs me everything." The shadows behind them grew darker, spreading from the house like an infection. And in the distance, Eleanor heard something else, a sound that might have been wind, or might have been the approach of something vast and terrible that had been hunting her across centuries. Lord Lucian Ravencroft, mysterious nobleman with secrets in his blood and centuries in his eyes, began leading Eleanor Russell away from the only life she'd ever known, toward a destiny written in ancient oaths and supernatural warfare. She didn't know yet that he was a vampire. She didn't know that she carried the last remnants of a gift called Lumina, the power to generate pure light that could destroy the darkness. She didn't know that the Shadowborn, an entity older than recorded history, had finally found her and would stop at nothing to consume her soul. But she would learn. She would awaken. And she would discover that sometimes the only way to survive the monsters in the dark is to marry one, and trust him to teach you how to become a monster yourself. Lady Cordelia Russell's shrill voice pierced through the servants' corridor like a blade. "Eleanor, stop skulking about and make yourself useful. You'll attend tonight's gala, but as staff, naturally. I won't have you embarrassing us in front of the Pemberton family, looking like some mad governess." Her mother's eyes raked over her with barely concealed disgust. "And for heaven's sake, if you have one of your episodes, have the decency to collapse somewhere discreet." Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the polished marble floor of the Russell Estate's grand entrance hall, her hands clasped tightly to stop them from trembling. Around her, the autumn of 1887 had brought London's elite to her family's annual charity gala, though charity seemed a peculiar word for an event designed primarily to showcase her sister's matrimonial prospects. Vivian and Seraphina glided past in gowns of emerald and sapphire silk, their laughter like crystal bells, while Eleanor wore the same gray dress she'd been given 3 years prior, now tight across the shoulders and frayed at the hem. The ballroom blazed with gaslight and candelabra, casting dancing shadows that made Eleanor's breath catch. She'd learned long ago not to mention how the shadows moved wrong, how they sometimes watched her with eyes that shouldn't exist. The tonics her mother forced down her throat each morning were meant to stop such delusions, Dr. Whitmore had assured them. Yet the visions only grew stronger. She was refilling champagne glasses near the orchestra when the whispers began. The crowd parted like water before a ship's bow, and Lord Lucian Ravenscroft entered. Eleanor had heard the rumors. The Ravenscroft family fortune was immense but cursed, their ancestral line plagued by some hereditary affliction that kept them shuttered away in their Yorkshire estate. No one could recall seeing any Ravenscroft in daylight, and the few who'd visited their manor spoke of it with hushed unease. He was devastating to look upon, pale as moonlight, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes that seemed to shift between deep brown and something far more unsettling. His evening clothes were impeccable, yet he wore them with the casual authority of someone for whom fashion was beneath notice. Every eye in the ballroom fixed upon him, yet his gaze swept the room as though searching for something specific. Then the vision slammed into Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. The ballroom twisted and darkened. Shadow creatures, massive, writhing things with forms that hurt to perceive, circled the chandelier above, their red eyes fixed hungrily on her. She could hear them whispering her name, or something like it, in voices that scraped against her mind. The champagne bottle slipped from her fingers. Before it could shatter, ice-cold hands caught both the bottle and her elbow. The vision evaporated like morning mist. Eleanor found herself staring into Lord Ravenscroft's face, close enough to see that his eyes were indeed rimmed with crimson, close enough to feel the unnatural chill radiating from his skin, even through his gloves. "Steady," he murmured, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place, something older than modern English. "I have you." The ballroom fell silent. A nobleman of his standing didn't touch servants, didn't acknowledge them at all, yet he held Eleanor's arm with careful gentleness as he set the champagne bottle aside. Then, to her absolute shock and the scandalized gasps of 300 guests, he didn't release her. "Lord and Lady Russell," he announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I must speak with you regarding your daughter." Eleanor's father materialized instantly, his face a mask of confused calculation. "My lord, there's been some mistake. This is merely—" "Eleanor Russell," Lucian interrupted, and something in his tone made even her father fall silent. "I wish to request her hand in marriage." The ballroom erupted. Eleanor felt her mother's sharp intake of breath, saw Vivian's face contort with jealous fury, watched her father's expression shift rapidly through shock, suspicion, and finally, naked greed. She looked up at Lord Ravenscroft, searching for mockery or madness in his face, but found only an intensity that made her lightheaded. "This is highly irregular," her father managed. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Lady Cordelia interjected, her voice honeyed with false warmth, her eyes gleaming with the opportunity to rid herself of her disappointing daughter. "We accept, of course. Such an honor for our dear Eleanor." "I would hear from the lady herself," Lucian said quietly, still looking only at Eleanor. Behind him, she could see the shadows in the corners retreating, sliding away from his presence like animals fleeing a predator. "Miss Russell, will you consent to be my wife?" Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. This had to be another vision. Some elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and her mother's tonics. Yet his hand on her arm felt solid and real, and for the first time since childhood, the whispers in her mind had gone completely silent. "I cannot yet explain why," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "But you are in grave danger. I offer you protection, respect, and truth in time. Will you trust me?" She had nothing to lose. No prospects, no future beyond serving a family that despised her. No hope that the visions would ever stop. But when she looked into his strange eyes, she felt something she'd never experienced. Recognition. As though he saw not the mad, peculiar girl her family mocked, but something else entirely. Something worthy of protecting. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "I accept." His smile was brief, but genuine, transforming his austere features. Then it settled. For just an instant, his eyes flashed deep crimson, bright enough that several nearby guests stepped back nervously. The window behind them exploded inward. Glass rained down as screams filled the ballroom, guests scrambling for cover. Lady Cordelia shrieked about vandals. Lord Pemberton shouted for the constable. But Eleanor saw what none of them could. A massive shadow creature, larger than the ones from her vision, its red eyes blazing with fury as it retreated into the night. It had been watching through the window, watching her, and now it had seen Lord Ravencroft claim her as his own. As servants rushed to clean the glass and calm the guests, Lucian's hand remained steady on Eleanor's arm. "It begins," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, louder, "We should marry quickly, Miss Russell. For your safety, the sooner you're under my protection, the better." Eleanor nodded, unable to tear her eyes from the shattered window where the creature had been. For the first time, someone else had driven the shadows away. Someone who seemed to understand that the monsters in her mind were terrifyingly real, and that someone was either her salvation or the most uninteresting thing she'd ever encountered. Possibly both. The wedding took place in a registry office with walls the color of ash and witnesses who smelled of pipe tobacco and indifference. Eleanor's father arrived only long enough to sign documents and collect an envelope that made his eyes widen with avarice before he departed without a word. Her mother didn't come at all. As Lucian slid the ring onto Eleanor's finger, a band of silver inscribed with symbols she didn't recognize, she felt the weight of her old life falling away like a discarded cloak. The journey north stretched across 2 days, the landscape transforming with each mile. London's soot-stained brick gave way to rolling countryside, which darkened into moorland as they approached Yorkshire. The sky itself seemed to lower, pressing down with clouds the color of old bruises. Lucian sat across from her in the carriage, his gaze never leaving her face for long, as though he feared she might vanish if he looked away. "Are you frightened?" he asked, as the moors rose around them like the backs of sleeping beasts. Eleanor considered lying, then thought better of it. "I've been frightened my entire life. This feels different." His expression softened. "Different how?" "Like being afraid of falling, rather than being crushed." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his touch still impossibly cold. "I won't let you fall." Thornhaven Manor emerged from the gloom like something from a fever dream. Massive stone walls rose from the moorland, black iron gates bearing intricate designs that made Eleanor's eyes water when she tried to focus on them. Protective wards, though she didn't yet know to call them that. The gates swung open at their approach, moved by no visible hand. The staff assembled in the entrance hall were unlike any servants Eleanor had known. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, was a severe woman whose skin held the same unnatural pallor as Lucian's. Henrik, the groundskeeper, was younger, but carried himself with the watchfulness of a soldier. Dr. Sebastian Cross, introduced as Lucian's oldest friend, had intelligent eyes that seemed to catalogue everything about Eleanor in a single glance. "My lady," Mrs. Blackwood said, curtsying deeply. "Welcome to Thornhaven. We are honored to serve you." The deference in her tone was so foreign to Eleanor's experience that she nearly looked behind herself to see who the housekeeper was actually addressing. These people, whatever they were, spoke to her as though she mattered. Her suite occupied the entire east wing. The bedroom alone was larger than the servants' quarters she'd occupied at the Russell estate. Thick carpets muffled her footsteps. A four-poster bed draped in midnight blue velvet dominated one wall, while another was lined floor to ceiling with books. Eleanor ran her fingers along their spines. A history of folklore, mythological bloodlines, the Lumina Chronicles. That last title made her pause, but before she could pull it from the shelf, Mrs. Blackwood announced that dinner would be served. Lucian sat at the head of the long dining table, Eleanor to his right. The food was exquisite. Roasted pheasant, root vegetables glazed with honey, fresh bread that steamed when broken open. Eleanor ate hungrily, realizing she'd been too nervous to touch food for days. Lucian, she noticed, merely moved items around his plate. He poured wine for them both, but never raised his glass to his lips. "You're not eating," she said finally. "I dined earlier." His voice was smooth, practiced. "Please, enjoy. Mrs. Blackwood is an excellent cook." After dinner, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Eleanor wandered the corridors. Thornhaven was a labyrinth of stone passages and shadowed corners. But unlike the shadows in London, these felt almost protective. She found herself in a portrait gallery, walls lined with paintings of women spanning what must have been centuries based on their clothing. Tudor ruffs, Georgian gowns, Regency Empire waists, and every face bore an uncanny resemblance to her own. She moved closer to read the small plaques beneath each frame. Isabella Russell, Lumina Bearer, 1521. Catherine Russell, Lumina Bearer, 1673. Margaret Russell, Lumina Bearer, 1789. The dates went on. Always Russells, always that strange phrase. Lumina Bearer. Those are your ancestors. Lucian's voice came from behind her, gentle as falling snow. You come from a line of extraordinary women. Eleanor spun to face him. What does it mean? Lumina Bearer. It means you are special, Eleanor. More special than you can yet understand. He gestured to the portraits. Every one of these women possessed a gift. The ability to generate light. Pure, radiant light that can destroy darkness itself. The gift manifests differently in each generation, sometimes skipping dozens of women before appearing again. His eyes met hers. In you, sir, it's been dormant, suppressed by your mother's tonics. But it's there. I can see it, like starlight beneath your skin. Eleanor's hands began to tremble. You're saying I'm like them? That I can... You will learn, In time. He reached out, but stopped short of touching her. Rest now. Tomorrow, we'll begin to answer your questions. That night, the vision came with crushing intensity. Eleanor found herself standing in Thornhaven's entrance hall, but the hall, as it had been centuries ago, rushes on the floor, torches on the walls. A woman who could have been Eleanor's twin stood before the great doors, her hands blazing with golden light as shadow creatures swarmed toward her. She was magnificent and terrible, holding back the darkness through sheer will. But there were too many. They overwhelmed her, and she fell. A younger Lucian, his face unlined, dressed in clothes from the Tudor period, ran to her, catching her before she hit the floor. Blood stained her dress. Her light flickered and died. No, Lucian's voice was broken, raw with grief. Isabella, please, protect them, the dying woman whispered. Swear to me, Lucian, protect my line. Protect the light. I swear it, he said, and his voice carried the weight of eternity. I will guard your bloodline until the last star falls. I will let no harm come to those who bear your light. Eleanor woke screaming, her own voice dragging her back to consciousness. Lucian was there instantly, sitting in the chair beside her bed, as though he'd been keeping vigil. Moonlight streaming through the windows cast half his face in shadow. You saw, he said quietly. Not a question. That woman, Isabella, Eleanor's voice shook. She died, and you were there, but that was the dates in the gallery. 366 years ago. Lucian leaned forward, his ancient eyes holding hers. Eleanor, I am not what you think I am. I have lived for 3 years, sustained by blood, cursed with immortality. And you are the last of a line I have protected since 1521. You are a lumina bearer. He paused, and in the silence, Eleanor could hear the absolute absence of his breathing. And something ancient and evil has finally found you. The morning after Lucian's revelation, Eleanor found her mother's journal hidden in a false bottom of her traveling trunk. The leather binding was cracked with age, and the pages crackled as she turned them. Lady Cordelia's elegant script documented everything. The tonics purchased from Dr. Whitmore, specifically formulated to suppress unnatural sensitivities. Observations about how Eleanor's episodes diminished with higher doses. A single damning line near the end. Better a normal daughter than a freak. The Russell gift must end with me. Eleanor's hands shook with rage. Her mother had known what she was, what she could become, and had deliberately poisoned her to prevent it. She was frightened. Lucian stood in the doorway of the library where Eleanor had been reading. The gift terrifies those who don't possess it. She had no right. Eleanor's voice cracked. All those years thinking I was mad. You weren't mad. You were awakening. He moved closer, his presence somehow both chilling and comforting. And now we must complete what she tried to prevent. The Shadowborn is an entity older than human memory. It feeds on fear and light-bearers like yourself, growing stronger with each soul it consumes. If it takes you, the last lumina, eternal darkness will spread across the world like a plague. Over the following weeks, Thornhaven transformed from sanctuary to training ground. Dr. Sebastian Cross, whose scholarly manner disguised a mind as sharp as broken glass, taught Eleanor the history of her bloodline. The Lumina gift had protected humanity from shadow creatures for millennia, but each bearer's power manifested uniquely. Some could create barriers of light. Others could purge darkness from infected souls. Still others could see through the Shadowborn's illusions. Henrik, the groundskeeper she'd thought merely watchful, revealed himself as a dhampir, half vampire, half human, and began teaching her combat. "Your light is a weapon," he said, his accent thick with Old Norse inflections. "But you must have the will to use it, even when it burns those you care for." The first time Eleanor successfully summoned her power, it happened in the training hall with Dr. Cross observing. She'd been attempting to light a single candle through will alone, frustration mounting as nothing happened. Then she thought of the shadow creature at the ballroom window, of the way it had looked at her with such hunger. And golden light exploded from her palms. The room filled with radiance so bright that Sebastian cried out, his pale skin blistering where the light touched him. "I'm sorry," Eleanor gasped, the light dying instantly. "I didn't mean that," Sebastian said, his burns already healing with supernatural speed. "Was magnificent. Do it again." The nights belonged to Lucian. They would sit in his study, a fire crackling in the hearth that he didn't need but maintained for her comfort, and he would tell her about the centuries he'd lived, the loneliness that had become his constant companion, the guilt that gnawed at him, 7 lumina bearers he'd protected over the generations, and all 7 had died. Isabella in 1521, Catherine in 1673, Margaret in 1792. He recited their names like a litany of failures. "I've been alive so long," he said one night, staring into his wine glass without drinking, "that I'd forgotten what it meant to feel anything beyond duty. And then you walked into that ballroom, and I felt something I haven't experienced in 300 years. He looked at her then, vulnerability written across his ancient face. "Terror, because I knew I couldn't let you die, and I knew I couldn't stop myself from caring whether you did." Eleanor reached across the space between their chairs and took his cold hand. "I'm not them. I'm not going to die. You don't know that. Neither do you." The kiss happened 3 nights later, during a training exercise gone wrong. Henrik had released a captured Shadowborn spawn to test Eleanor's reflexes. The creature was small, barely the size of a dog, but its red eyes burned with malevolence as it lunged toward Lucian. Eleanor didn't think. Light poured from her hands in a concentrated beam, striking the spawn mid-leap and reducing it to ash before it could reach him. Lucian moved to her so quickly she barely saw him cross the room. His hands cupped her face, still warm from channeling light, and he kissed her with a desperate intensity that spoke of centuries of loneliness finally breaking. Eleanor kissed him back, tasting wine he'd never drunk on his lips, feeling his fingers tangle in her hair as though he feared she might dissolve if he let go. "You saved me," he whispered against her mouth. "You saved me first," she replied. But even as Eleanor's power grew and her feelings for Lucian deepened, omens darkened Thornhaven's grounds. Dead birds appeared on the windowsills each morning, their eyes burned out. Servants reported shadow figures testing the wards at dusk. Eleanor's dreams filled with whispers in languages that predated words, promising her things she couldn't quite remember upon waking, but that left her feeling hollow and afraid. Then the letter arrived, delivered by a courier who couldn't remember who'd hired him. Lady Cordelia's handwriting flowed across expensive paper. "Dearest Eleanor, we hope your new life brings you joy. Vivian is engaged to Lord Hartley, and we would be honored if you would attend the celebration ball. It would mean so much to have the entire family together. Your loving mother." Eleanor read it twice, searching for the trap she knew must be there. Lucian found her standing at the window, the letter crumpled in her fist. "It's bait," he said simply. "The Shadowborn will use your love for your family against you. It knows you'll try to save even those who hurt you. They don't believe the danger exists. They'll die thinking I abandoned them out of spite." Eleanor's voice was hollow. "I spent my whole life wanting to be free of them, but I can't." "You can't let them die." Lucian sighed. "I know. It's what makes you who you are. It's also what makes you vulnerable." Eleanor turned to face him. "I'll go, but not as the daughter they scorned. I'll go as what I am, a Lumina bearer, and I'll protect them whether they deserve it or not." Lucian began to protest, but Dr. Cross appeared in the doorway, an ancient text clutched in his hands, his face ashen. "My lord, my lady, I found something. A passage about the Shadowborn's hunting method." He opened the book with trembling fingers. "It feeds first on the bearer's despair. To claim her fully, it must break her heart and shatter her spirit. It will use those she loves most as weapons against her." The three of them stood in terrible silence, understanding settling over them like a funeral shroud. The trap wasn't at the ball. The trap was Eleanor's compassion itself. The very thing that made her strong enough to wield the light was the weapon the Shadowborn would use to destroy her. The Russell estate blazed with light when their carriage arrived, every window glowing like a challenge against the autumn darkness. Eleanor descended in a gown of deep sapphire silk that made her skin luminous, her posture no longer hunched, but regal. She'd spent 3 weeks training, fighting, and discovering that the strange girl her family had hidden away was actually something magnificent. The transformation showed in every movement. Lady Cordelia stood in the entrance hall, her practiced smile faltering when she saw Eleanor. "My dear, you look different." "I am different." Eleanor's voice carried a resonance it never had before, as though light itself had a sound. Behind her, Lucian's presence was a cold weight, his crimson-rimmed eyes cataloging every shadow, every servant, every guest with predatory precision. Vivienne and Seraphina descended the stairs in matching rose gowns, their beauty suddenly seeming brittle and artificial next to Eleanor's otherworldly radiance. Seraphina's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Vivienne's face twisted with an emotion Eleanor had never seen directed at her before. Envy. The ballroom was a symphony of silk and crystal, hundreds of candles casting golden light across London's elite. But Lucian's hand tightened on Eleanor's arm. "Something's wrong," he murmured. "The shadows are too deep. Look at the servants. Their eyes." Eleanor followed his gaze. The footmen moved mechanically, their stares vacant, and when one turned toward her, she saw his pupils had been completely consumed by darkness. Thralls. The Shadowborn had already infiltrated the gathering. She caught sight of her old room through a doorway, converted to storage now, filled with cast-off furniture and forgotten things. Slipping away from the crowd, she found another journal hidden beneath loose floorboards, this one older. Her mother's handwriting filled pages with damning clarity. The Russell gift must end. Better a proper daughter than a circus attraction. Dr. Whitmore assures me the tonics will suppress her unnatural abilities permanently. "You knew." Eleanor's voice was ice when Cordelia appeared in the doorway. "All those years you told me I was mad, you knew exactly what I was." Her mother's mask cracked. "I knew you were dangerous. The gift destroyed your grandmother, drove your great-aunt into madness. I wanted to save you from that fate. You wanted to save yourself from embarrassment." Before Cordelia could respond, the clock struck midnight, and the ballroom transformed. The thralls dropped their pretense, their eyes blazing with reflected crimson light. Guests screamed as shadows peeled away from walls, forming into writhing creatures with too many limbs. At the center of it all, darkness coalesced into something massive, a towering figure whose form hurt to perceive, whose red eyes burned with ancient malevolence. She is beautiful, this last little light. The Shadowborn's voice was a chorus of the damned, echoing from every corner simultaneously. I have been feeding on her despair for years through your words, Cordelia Russell. You have seasoned her soul magnificently. Lady Cordelia collapsed to her knees, understanding and horror washing over her face. She had been a puppet, her cruelty amplified and directed by the very entity now threatening to devour them all. Save your family, Lumina, child, the Ancient One purred, and I will consume you quickly, painlessly. Let them burn, and I will make their suffering eternal while you watch. Lucian moved faster than human eyes could follow, his form shifting, fangs extending, eyes blazing pure crimson, his genteel facade falling away to reveal the apex predator beneath. Dr. Cross and Henrik materialized from the shadows where they'd been waiting, weapons drawn, and together they threw themselves at the spawn creatures surging toward Eleanor's cowering family. Eleanor watched Lucian take a blow meant for her father, saw shadow claws rake across his chest, drawing blood that steamed in the air. Something inside her broke free, not shattered, but unlocked. Light erupted from her hands with a force that shook the building's foundations. Golden radiance filled the ballroom, and shadow creatures ignited like kindling, their screams dissolving into silence. The Ancient One recoiled, its massive form retreating through the walls. But the effort left Eleanor on her knees, gasping, her power depleted. The Shadowborn's laughter echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Magnificent. Soon you'll be ripe for harvest. Lucian gathered the Russells, her sobbing mother, her terrified sisters, her speechless father, and transported them through the night to Thornhaven. But the manor's wards flickered weakly when they arrived, as though something was draining them. Dr. Cross's face was grim. She's awakened, but not mastered the gift. If she faces the Ancient One now, it will consume her light and achieve ultimate victory. The answer came at dawn, when the Crimson Conclave surrounded Thornhaven's gates. Rogue vampires, dozens of them, their leader Lord Draven calling out, "Give us the Lumina, Ravencroft, or we all perish when the Ancient One comes." Eleanor stood at the window, watching enemies gather outside while feeling the Ancient One's presence growing closer, like a storm about to break. Her family huddled in Thornhaven's great hall, finally understanding what she was, what she'd always been. Lucian stood beside her, wounded but ready to fight until his final death. "There is a way," Eleanor said quietly, the answer crystallizing with terrible clarity, "to destroy the Shadowborn permanently and survive. But it requires the one thing everyone says is impossible." She turned to face Lucian, seeing fear and understanding war in his ancient eyes. "I need you to turn me into a vampire." "No." Lucian's voice broke on the word. "Eleanor, you don't understand what you're asking. Eternal existence, forever bound to blood, never seeing sunlight without weakness. Everything I wanted to spare you." Eleanor took his cold hands in hers. "I'm already living in darkness, Lucian, but with you, I've found light. I choose this. I choose us. I choose to protect a world that never protected me." She showed him the ancient text she'd found in the library, a passage Dr. Cross had overlooked. A Lumina bearer could trap the Shadowborn within herself, then survive its destruction if she became immortal before it consumed her from within. Dr. Cross contacted the Vampire Council through methods Eleanor didn't understand, and ancient voices spoke through mirrors and shadows, deliberating. Finally, they agreed. This was humanity's only path to survival. In the Great Hall, Eleanor's family watched with horror as the reality settled over them. Her father spoke quietly, perhaps for the first time with genuine honesty. "We never deserved you, Eleanor. Save us or don't. Both would be just." The transformation ritual took place in Lucian's chambers as dawn approached. Ancient words in languages older than Latin, the exchange of blood, bitter and cold as winter rivers. Eleanor felt her mortality slipping away like a silk scarf pulled from her shoulders, and as the sun crested the horizon, the Ancient One attacked. The entity blotted out the dawn itself, a massive shadow that made the sky writhe. The Crimson Conclave breached Thornhaven's walls, desperate to seize Eleanor before her transformation completed. She lay in Lucian's arms, caught between states, neither fully mortal nor vampire, her Lumina powers destabilizing, vulnerable to everything. Lucian fought like the demon the legends claimed he was, his form a blur of supernatural speed and ancient rage as he battled Lord Draven. Henrik and Dr. Cross held the inner wards, their bodies breaking under the assault. And then, impossibly, Vivian and Seraphina appeared, armed with blessed silver from Thornhaven's armory, standing between the Crimson Conclave and their sister. For the first time in their lives, they protected Eleanor instead of scorning her. The Ancient One flowed through the walls like smoke, its presence filling the chamber with suffocating darkness. At last, the final light, mine to consume. Eleanor, still transforming, made her choice. She opened herself completely, letting the Shadowborn pour into her body like poison into a vessel. "You want my light? Come and take it." Inside her consciousness, Eleanor walked through a nightmare landscape where the Shadowborn reigned. Hundreds of consumed souls, Lumina bearers from across centuries, cried out from within the entity. But they weren't just screaming. They were waiting, and when Eleanor called to them, they answered. Isabella's spirit appeared, radiant and terrible. "Finish what we could not. Free us. Shine." Eleanor's vampire transformation completed in that moment between heartbeats. The darkness that defined vampire nature became a prison, containing the Shadowborn within her immortal form. She channeled every fragment of Lumina power inward, burning the Ancient One from within. The entity howled as golden fire consumed it from inside its own stolen vessel. Outside the mindscape, Lucian understood what needed to happen. With shaking hands, he drove a blessed silver blade through Eleanor's heart, the only way to expel the Shadowborn's essence while trusting her new immortality to survive the wound. Eleanor screamed. Golden light exploded from her chest in a column that pierced the ceiling and tore through the darkness, blotting out the sun. The Shadowborn was expelled, caught between Lumina radiance and dawn light. And for the first time in millennia, the Ancient One knew fear. It burned, and it died, permanently. Eleanor collapsed, the blade still in her chest. Lucian's blood, ancient and powerful, combined with her vampire nature to heal what should have been fatal. Her eyes opened, no longer brown, but touched with amber fire. She was something unprecedented, a vampire who could channel light. The Crimson Conclave fled. The Vampire Council arrived, restoring order and revealing that the Russell fortune had been built on Shadowborn corrupted investments. The family was destitute. Eleanor offered them sanctuary, but they would work honestly for the first time in their privileged lives. Lady Cordelia knelt before her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I was so afraid of what you were. I never saw who you were. My extraordinary daughter." 5 years later, Thornhaven had become a sanctuary for supernatural refugees and humans with emerging gifts. Eleanor taught young people to embrace their differences, while Vivian ran the medical wing and Seraphina taught combat. Their parents managed operations, humbled but purposeful. At twilight, Eleanor and Lucian stood together at the manor gates, watching the boundary between light and darkness. "They laughed when I married you," Eleanor said, her hand in his. "They thought you were a monster." "And what do you think now?" Lucian asked, turning her to face him. Eleanor smiled, her fangs catching the dying light. "I think you're my monster, and I'm yours, and together we're humanity's best hope against what lies in the dark." They kissed as the sun set and the moon rose, eternal guardians watching over a world that would never know how close it had come to falling into shadow, saved by the woman everyone thought was worthless and the vampire who saw her light even in her darkest hour.